Hello, welcome to part 3 of this Irish lace sampler project, where we're making this little sampler here, which is a 2-panel of Irish lace. And in part 2, we learned how to do Brussels point. In part 1, we laid down this kind of scaffolding or support structure called a cordon to support the Irish lace stitches. So don't worry if you missed those first 2 parts. They're still there and you can go back. And today what we're going to do is work on this second panel here on the right. And if I just zoom in a little bit to show you what the stitch is going to look like that we're learning today. Okay, so I've zoomed in a little bit because this stitch can look very tiny. And it's a very closely knit kind of stitch called a chord stitch. And you can see it on this one. You can see it in a slightly thinner thread on this one. Hopefully the focus is nice. It's a lovely sort of a woven stitch. And I didn't show you that one first because I thought you would like doing the kind of open stitch of Brussels point that we ended up doing. But as you can see, I have a combination of stitches going in this panel on this example. And I think that's what we'll do on the panel today. We'll do a few different kinds of stitches on it. There it is in the middle with a bit of sort of more open work in the middle of it there. It's a really nice, the chord stitch is a really nice stitch to use with other more open lace looking stitches. So we're going to start off this panel with chord stitch. And it starts off a bit like the last one we were doing, the last panel. That's where we came in on the last panel. And we're doing the same thing to start this panel. Coming in from the side. No knot in the thread, but just a little bit of a tail, which I'm holding on to. And then I'm going to make a little loop just to fasten that thread. And I'm turning the work around just to get under that thread properly. Holding it down, going through the loop, and then when I get to the end, fasten it. So just the same as we did to start off our Brussels point, and just make sure there's a bit of tension on it. Okay, so I'm going to go up one more wrap around the knot that I made, up a little bit higher under the cordon. I'm not going through the cotton at all. I'm just going under the cordon. And again, I'm pulling through. You don't even need to make the loop. You can just wrap. So so far it's the same as Brussels stitch. And in fact, this is going to be very similar to the Brussels stitch that we did over here. So if you find yourself running into any trouble with my instructions for how to do this first line, you can go back to the previous video, which is going to be a little bit more time spent on explaining this stitch that I'm doing. The only thing about this stitch for the chord stitch that we're going to make, I'm making it a little bit smaller and a little bit closer together because I want that fairly tight weave. So again, the thread is going under to make the loop, going under the needle, and I'm coming through the top part of the cordon to make that little stitch. Okay, so if you have any difficulty understanding this stitch, it's exactly the same as this Brussels point, which we covered in part 2 video. And we're going to try and keep these all the same size. So I'm going to go across again. I might have to turn this cordon around very slightly to get through it because there are couching stitches across it. So again, under the cordon again. Make sure the thread is behind the needle and then pull through. And the thread I'm using is a Madeira size 30, which is a quilting cotton thread. So you'd need the right thread for this. So I'm trying to make sure that those 2 stitches are the same size. And they are much smaller than the loops on this side, if you'll notice. But they're not completely closed, because on the next row I'm going to still need to get my needle through the middle of each one of those stitches. But when we come back across the row, it's going to be a little bit different the way it's done compared to the way we did our Brussels point. So I'll do one more stitch just to show you the stitch, and then I'll meet you at the end of the row where we're about to turn to do row 2. And there we go, 3 stitches made. I'll keep going to the end of the row. See you at the end of the row. So at the end of the row, you should be able to see on my row here, they're more or less all the same height and the same width. But I've left them a lot smaller than the way I made the same stitch on the other side. So there are more of them, obviously. So we have to sort of secure this end to the cord on the outside by making a little loop that forms a knot. Now this is where it starts getting very different from Brussels point. We're going to come around that cordon thing on the side again and under it. And there's no knot in this one, we're just coming under it. And we're not coming down as far as we would have to make our Brussels point stitch here, but we're coming along a little bit further down than we made the stitch, and we're going to go straight across and into the other side in a straight line across there. So you can hold the thread as you decide where to put your needle in. This thing is going to provide a little bit extra structure to the cord stitch. Here's the first stitch. It can be hard to see these, so this is why I'm not making it like super tight. So it can be hard to actually see your stitch. So you're passing the actual cord under the needle as well as passing the bit of thread that you would make your Brussels point loop with under the cord, so that the cord gets worked into that loopy stitch. Okay, and you're doing that for every stitch. So just show you again, this is why you wanted a little bit of tension on this. The tension doesn't have to be perfect, it'll work itself in okay. And again, you're not going through that green bit at all, the cotton. You're staying on the front of the work and just working through the stitches. There's your second stitch. So that straight bit of thread gets kind of hidden in the stitch, but it does kind of contribute to the weave of the thing and holding the things together in a tighter looking affair than this, as well as the size of the stitch contributing to the tight weave of the stitch. So you keep working across like that, going under that little thread that you ran across for the, it's the second row really, but it's really only taking that thread across. So you see the way the stitch is looking? Keep going that way. I'll meet you at the end of the row. I'll do one more stitch and then show you what the row looks like when I finish it, because I don't want a super long video. Do a loop with that thread enclosed in the loop. Okay, so keep going like that and I'll meet you at the end of the row. Okay, so that's the end of that row, and I'm happy enough with the tension on that row, but if I wasn't, or there were any stitches weird or anything, we can do our little trick of getting the needle through the stitch, pulling it down a little bit, and doing that for any stitches we think are the wrong size, and sort it out a little bit before we tie off the end of that row. But at the end of the row 2, we're going to tie it off exactly the same way as we did in row 1, making a loop that turns into a little knot, and then one more wrap, and not coming down as far as we did when we were doing the Brussels point stitch for the other panel, because we just want a cord to be running across straight across that line. There's your first stitch. Sorry, I'm looking through the camera lens now to try and make this stitch because I can't see over the camera. So that's how you make the stitch. See the way it's making a little loop. And we're going to go all the way across the right for row 3. And then we're going to come back and we're going to do one more row. Just before I finish row 3, let me just show you the idea of sorting out the tension if it goes wrong during the row. Suppose I decide I like the height of that one, but these ones aren't quite in line with it. I'm going to pull them down like that. So I can do that either as I go along, if it needs to be done. Your tension might work out perfectly as you're sewing, or you can wait till the end of the row and then you know, have a look at them all and see if there are any ones particularly needing attention. So just to point that out, that can be done during the sewing of the row or at the end if needed. Might not be needed, you see. Okay, see you at the end of row 3. Okay, we're at the end of row 3, and you can see that lovely cord stitch woven look starting to appear now. When we do 4 rows, we should be able to see it nice and clearly. I have my finishing loop that turns into a kind of a knot which holds it to the cordon, and then I'm coming down at least one wrap. I could have done 2, but I think I'm okay at 1 there. I think that's going to be far enough down, and I'm going to come straight across to start off row 4. Okay, so row 4, same thing. We're looking for the center of the stitch and doing my loop. So we'll see you at the end of row 4, and then I'll show you how to do our Brussels point open kind of lace work straight under the cord stitch. Okay, so at the end of row 4, I'll talk to you again. Okay, so the end of row 4, and I'm just tying it off with that loop at the end, and it has that lovely woven look that the cord stitch gives you, and it's really pretty. We're going to switch back to a Brussels point stitch again, because this is lovely, and you could keep going down just a plain panel if you wanted to, but you can combine it, you see, with other stitches. And because we've learned another stitch already, it's kind of cool to combine it. So we're going to come down with another wrap around that cord, which isn't really, hasn't got a knot in it as such. And a second time we're going to wrap, because our Brussels point stitch is going to be a bigger stitch all round than the stitch we did for the cord stitch, which the cord stitch, I could have gone even tighter on that if I'd wanted to. I just didn't want to make it super difficult to get into the stitches. But the Brussels point stitch, we're making it a kind of a longer and a wider stitch. So instead, we're going to be working from left to right, and we're not going to do the cord, take that cord across this time. We're going to do a Brussels point stitch from right to left, because if you remember from part 2, a Brussels point stitch, you could work it from left to right, and then you could come back and work it from right to left for the next row. So this row, we're starting on the right and working to the left with a Brussels point stitch. And we're going to count, if I can see it, if I can see it, to find the second stitch to go into. There's the first stitch. There's the second stitch, because if the Brussels point stitch is longer that way in height, it's also wider than the cord stitch. And we're passing our thread to the left to make the loop this time. We had been passing it to the right. And so this one is basically the loop, but without the cord. And it's a Brussels point, and we're going to do a few rows of that. So there's the stitch I just went into and counting 1, 2 across from that, and this is going to be my next stitch I'm going into. So I'm only going into every second stitch, and I'm making a loop. Okay. And as I say, if you're not terribly clear on Brussels point, video number 2 is there for you, isn't it? Okay, so you see the way that's a bigger stitch, and it's going to look really pretty with the cord stitch. I'm going to work all the way across, and I'll meet you at the end, and we'll see how our row turned out. And I'm just finishing off with a loop at the end that's going to make a little knot to fasten it. And then I'm going to come down a bit further on the cordon by going under that cordon thread. This one is going to the right with our Brussels point stitch, so the loop goes under in the direction of the right to get that loop. And I've gone into the second stitch because I just ignored that little loop, which was too small to even be half a stitch, too fiddly to go into. And it looks fine to just ignore it. So this time I'm going into every stitch because I've established my Brussels stitch pattern, okay? So I don't need to skip the way I did on the previous row, which when you think about it was a much smaller stitch, so that's why I had to skip. So again, the thread is going under to make that little loop. And I've got the lovely open pattern of Brussels point. Now, I'm only doing 2 rows of this because I want you to get plenty practice in on the cord stitch. Now, when we go back to cord stitch, here's what happens. We get our cord going from right to left. Now we're ready to start again, and it's as easy as going into the line above it. However, if you remember, our spacing the last time was such that we could fit one of these Brussels point into, we had to skip every second stitch so to get our size right. So we're going twice into the middle of each stitch to get it back to being a cord stitch. Now we're not pulling it to full tension for the cord stitch. We're going to go in twice. So twice into the middle of each Brussels stitch just for this row to get us back to cord stitch. Okay, so we should have twice as many cord stitches as we had Brussels point stitches. In other words, we're getting back to the number of stitches we had. thereabouts, mightn't be exact, but it's going to have the right tension. It's going to have hopefully a similar tension to this one. How many times did I go in there? Did I get my second stitch? No, that's the first one, I think. There we go, and we'll keep going to the end. See you at the end. All right, so I'm at the end of the row, and I have a little bit of thread left, but rather than run out in the end of a row, I'm going to attach a new thread here now. So basically what I can do is just tie off the end of the row, and as long as you're running out of thread is no problem, as long as you're prepared to attach at the side. And it's the same as I did before. I'm just coming in from another side to attach the thread. Hold on to the thread and, make a little loop. And you don't mind if there are sort of little tails hanging out of the work at this stage. Okay, so I've come out at the right spot, and I'm going to go into every single one of these stitches and do basically a Brussels point stitch going from left to right. So again, I've got very tiny little stitches, so take my time. There we are. There's the first one. That would be my second row of cord stitch. Then I'll do another 2 rows. Okay, so I'll see you when I have 4 rows of cord stitch done, basically. So here I am. I've done 4 rows of that, and I'm just tying off right on top of that little loose bit of attached thread that I had. It holds it down even more. So I've left space down the bottom for what we're going to do next time, because we're doing a double Brussels point next time, and then we probably will have space for a row or 2 more of cord stitch before we finish that off, and then we'll do a few more embellishments on this. So I'll see you next time for double Brussels point, and happy Irish lace making. Bye bye.